Congressman, you have the floor.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight for our digital town hall. I am Congressman Kevin Mullin, excited to be hosting tonight's live digital town hall. We will be talking about our democracy, the future of our country, and how the judicial branch and our courts are standing up to the Trump administration's harmful actions. We are living in the midst of authoritarian attacks on our democracy, our Constitution, and the rule of law. I am very honored tonight to be joined by two very distinguished guests from Stanford University's School of Law and the University of San Francisco's School of Law. These legal experts are going to provide us with a rundown of some of the latest court cases that are pushing back against the Trump administration's executive overreach. We're also going to be discussing the role of our Constitution, our Congress, and all of you as members of the public in defending our democracy. My office has been receiving hundreds of calls from concerned residents, and during my last in-person town hall, I was so moved by some of the stories that I heard. People are understandably scared about what the Trump administration is doing. Republicans are proposing to slash over $800 billion from the budget. There's no way to do that without drastically affecting Medicaid and stripping resources from the Social Security offices, for example, that millions of seniors rely on. Trump has enabled an unelected billionaire, Elon Musk, and his Doge operation to fire hardworking federal employees and handed over the public's sensitive data. Trump is causing chaos in our economy with ever-changing, reckless tariff policies and hurting the pocketbooks of Americans across the country. And he's trying to dismantle the Department of Education. We are living through this authoritarian attack on our Constitution, and like many of you, I am incredibly angered by what I see on a daily basis. I'm upset, committed to doing everything in my power to fight back. Our country was founded on the principles of democracy. As Americans, we refuse to be ruled by a king. But Trump is acting like a dictator, which is why we need to do everything we can to protect our democracy and the future of our country. I want to give everyone a quick rundown of how tonight's call is going to work. If you're on the phone and would like to ask a question, please press *3 to get connected with my staff. Press *3 if you'd like to ask a question. You can also watch a video live stream of the town hall at kevinmullin.house.gov/live. That's kevinmullin.house.gov/live. After first hearing from our guests, we're going to start with questions for them that are specific to the courts and the judicial branch. Then later on, we'll be opening it up for some more general questions that you may have for me. I am also planning an in-person town hall in the very near future. So if you'd like to stay in touch, my staff always wants me to remind you to sign up for our e-newsletter at kevinmullin.house.gov. That is my website address, kevinmullin.house.gov. So before we turn to our expert guests, we do have a poll. We want to engage our audience right at the outset here. And Chris, I'm going to turn this over to you. If you could put that slide up. This is, we were actually going to plan two, but this is the number 2 poll question, which I think is the best one. I want to get a sense of what our audience feels about this. If you could pull up that slide, Chris, and offer that poll, and we'd like to solicit some feedback, and then we'll post the poll results here during the show a little bit later.
Thank you, Congressman. Here's the question. What do you believe is our biggest threat to democracy today? If you believe it's political polarization, press 1. If you believe it's the president not respecting the judicial branch, press 2. If you believe it's the spread of misinformation, press 3. For efforts to suppress voting rights, press 4. And if you believe it's something else, other, press 5. Again, real quickly. What is our biggest threat to democracy today? Press 1 for political polarization. Press 2 for the president not respecting the judicial branch. Press 3 for the spread of misinformation. Press 4 for efforts to suppress voting rights. Press 5 for other.
Great. Thank you, Chris. We will post those results a little bit later in tonight's digital town hall. So with that, I am very pleased to introduce two incredible legal experts based right here in the Bay Area. Easha Anand is the co-director of Stanford University's Supreme Court Litigation Clinic, where she and her team have been closely tracking what's happening and work to support clients who are heading to the nation's highest court. Easha earned her JD from UC Berkeley School of Law and clerked for Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor and a judge on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals as well. Thank you, Easha, so much for being with us tonight. We also have with us Bill Hing, who is a professor at my alma mater, the University of San Francisco. He is a professor there in the School of Law. Bill has deep expertise in immigration law and racial justice policies. He has served as a co-counsel during a precedent-setting U.S. Supreme Court asylum case and is the founder of the Immigrant Legal Resource Center in San Francisco, as well as USF's Immigration Defense Clinic. He's also received awards for authoring numerous articles and books. It's great to see you again, Bill, and thank you for joining us. A reminder for those of us on the phone, if you'd like to ask a question of our guests or me, please press star 3 to get connected with our staff. That's press star 3 if you'd like to ask a question. If you are watching online, you can submit your questions in writing. We'll be starting with questions for our guest focused on the courts, then we'll take more general questions later this evening. So, Easha, before joining Stanford University, you clerked for Supreme Court Justice Sotomayor and for Judge Paul Watford on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, which is based in San Francisco and the largest of the 13 federal courts of appeal. We'd ask you if you can give us a little bit of an overview of the court's role in our American democracy, sort of a kind of a quick courts 101, if you will, as it comes when it comes to our protecting our democracy.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you so very much for that kind introduction, Congressman Mullin. Thank you, everyone, for being on this call and having me. So we all learn in high school civics about the 3 branches of government, right? Legislature makes the laws, judiciary interprets the laws, executive enforces the laws, right? It's written into our Constitution. The president shall take care that the laws be faithfully executed. And part of that structure of government is that when the courts interpret the law, the executive changes how the law is enforced to respond to that interpretation. And it's turning out that that part, the executive follows what the judiciary commands, isn't backed by anything in particular. It's just an incredibly strong norm. But that norm has held, right? That's the beauty of the American experiment. Peaceful transition of power, integrity of elections, separation of powers. When push comes to shove, there's not an enforcement mechanism, just all of our shared faith in this democracy we've created. And so, despite some dark times, right, Andrew Jackson and the Trail of Tears, we've maintained the integrity of our structure of government kind of against the odds. And in the past, where there's been an assault on the legitimacy of the judiciary, it has often been the president who has stepped into the breach to back up the judicial branch, right? Think Eisenhower sending troops to Little Rock to enforce the court's desegregation orders. I worry a little bit that that consensus is fraying. And so I want to end my kind of opening answer by reading an excerpt from an opinion last week by Judge Harvey Wilkinson III. He's appointed to a federal circuit court. So that's the sort of second court you go to, starts in the trial court and then the circuit court, by President Ronald Reagan. And Judge Wilkinson, he votes the way you'd expect a Reagan appointee to vote, Republican Party line in just about every case. So I think it's particularly powerful that he is the one penning this sentiment. He writes, "The basic differences between the judicial and executive branches mandate a serious effort at mutual respect. Today, the branches come too close to grinding irrevocably against one another. We yet cling to the hope that it is not naive to believe our good brethren in the executive branch perceive the rule of law as vital to the American ethos. This case presents their unique chance to vindicate that value and to summon the best that is within us while there is still time." I hope Judge Wilkinson is not naive to believe our good brethren in the executive branch still perceive the rule of law as vital to the American ethos. But for all the reasons you mentioned at the outset, Congressman Mullin, I'm worried.
Well, it is quite a decision, quite a write-up that Judge Wilkinson issued. I would encourage folks, if they are interested, to take a look at that write-up. And a reminder to press *3 if you have a question for our legal experts. And Easha, I want to stay with you for just a second. There have been nearly 200 lawsuits filed against the Trump administration. 90 of those have at least temporarily paused some of his damaging actions. Can you give us just a few examples? Some of the most noteworthy cases, you mentioned, of course, the Kilmar Abrego Garcia case, but others during this first 100 days in office. What are the impacts on curbing the executive overreach? We are hearing from the congressional side that there are wins happening in court almost daily, and there are so many things moving out there. We wanted to give our viewers, my constituents, a sense of what some of the most significant ones are, implications for the future with some of those judicial rulings.
Sure. So as you alluded to, there's no way I can do justice to the kind of sheer volume of litigation happening right now. But let me just touch on kind of three big categories of litigation happening. So first big category, Trump administration has, as we know, said about kind of systematically dismantling the federal government. They fired people, both line employees kind of en masse and heads of agencies that are not even supposed to be fireable by the president. They've dismantled agencies. They've cut off the flow of federal funding across an enormous range of grants and programs. For now, the Trump administration has beaten back many court challenges in this category. But many of their wins have been technical. So for instance, the Supreme Court saying, you didn't bring this lawsuit in the correct court, not kind of permanent wins. The one category where I suspect the Trump administration will get some victories is in this category about independent agencies. So many features of our government many powers of our government are given to agencies where the head is not supposed to be just fireable with no notice on purely political grounds at the whim of anyone, right? Think the Federal Election Commission, think the Federal Reserve, right? These entities we really think should be independent of political pressure. That category of challenges we have not seen as much success with, and we know that the conservative supermajority on the United States Supreme Court has long expressed skepticism of those kinds of agencies. That's bucket one. Bucket two is the First Amendment stuff, and here the record is categorically terrible for the Trump administration. This is the bucket of either punishing people and organizations who don't share your view, or trying to coerce people into doing things contrary to their views with the threat of withdrawing federal funding. And with one or two notable exceptions, these challenges have been successful in court across a range of judges, including Trump appointees. It turns out you cannot actually discriminate against someone on the basis of their speech. That's why we have a First Amendment. Now, the Supreme Court has not yet weighed in on those cases in a meaningful way, but the sort of breadth of judges who have said with no difficulty, this is unconstitutional, gives me hope. The final bucket is the immigration cases, and Bill is going to talk in a moment about the case we've all been following the most closely. But a few words about kind of what else is going on here. So along one track, the administration is trying to move people into the non-citizen and therefore removable bucket. So most notably, the administration is advancing this birthright citizenship theory, air quotes because it's fabricated essentially out of whole cloth, wherein even someone born in the United States may not be a U.S. citizen, depending on her parents' status. The Supreme Court has agreed to hear argument in May, not on the validity of that argument, so not on the idea that someone born in this country is still not a U.S. citizen, but on a sort of technical ground related to whether the lowest court that heard this case had the power to make a decision that covered the whole country. Now, asterisk, the Supreme Court had no trouble with these low-level courts in Texas making policy for the whole country when it was Biden administration actions they were halting, but apparently has many more questions now that it's the Trump administration being stopped. And then the other track is the effort to remove as many people from the United States as possible, process and laws be damned. And this is the track where we've come the closest to seeing outright defiance of court orders, right? So take, for instance, the president's position that under the Alien Enemies Act, he can summarily remove anyone who is ostensibly a member of Tren de Aragua to a prison in El Salvador, no questions asked. So this big class first goes before a judge in D.C., tells Trump knock it off. He doesn't, and he actually refuses to tell the judge when he when the planes carrying people in violation of a court order took up, goes up to the Supreme Court, which kind of says you shouldn't have had to appear before this judge actually, and doesn't actually say a word to rebuke Donald Trump. But it also does say before you put someone on a plane, you have to give them notice and you have to give them a chance to go to court and fight. It's kind of a mixed bag, but then the Trump administration continues obscuring what they're doing. They comply with the Supreme Court's order in only the most half-hearted of ways. Give someone notice as required, but in English when they don't speak English, with only a few hours' notice. And last Friday, we saw, for the first time in my lifetime, the court springing into action in a way that seems to really meet the exigencies of the moment. The ACLU rushed to the Supreme Court and said, basically, they're loading people from this detention facility in Texas onto buses right now. Do something. And the court, to its credit, and I'm not always the one to credit the currently composed Supreme Court, says, freeze. Tells the administration at 1 a.m. in the middle of the night, stop everything. And as two of the justices, Justice Alito and Justice Thomas, note in dissent that is a pretty unprecedented thing to do. But we live in unprecedented times. And I, for one, am glad that the Supreme Court is finally kind of cottoning on to that fact.
Incredible overview, Easha. Thank you so much for that. I want to make sure our viewers and listeners know to press *3 to ask a question. You may also press *6 to subscribe to my e-newsletter. So Bill Hing, on this Abrego Garcia case, which has received so much media attention, you are an immigration attorney with expertise in deportation proceedings and the constitutional rights that protect everyone here in America. At least we've taken that for granted to some degree, I think. Can you tell us what this case means, why we should be concerned, and what are you hearing from the immigrant community that you interact with on a regular basis?
Thank you for the opportunity, Congressman. I'll tell you, that case is critical to the type of work we do. In our immigration clinic at USF, we have over 450 asylum seekers and unaccompanied minors, who many of whom are applying for the same type of relief that Mr. Abrego Garcia was awarded. He was granted an asylum-like relief that's called withholding of removal, which barred his deportation to El Salvador specifically. And he's El Salvadoran. Most of the others that were sent to El Salvador were from Venezuela. And so that's what made it particularly egregious, that it was a violation of an order that was previously granted by an immigration judge. And so the fact that recently that Senator Van Helen was granted access to visit with him, and that the Supreme Court has said that the Trump administration should facilitate his return. And there's a debate, believe it or not, over what the word facilitate means. I do believe that in spite of the rhetoric and in spite of President Bukele sitting next to President Trump last week in a very offensive way, continuing to tease about Mr. Abrego Garcia, I do believe at the end of the day that Mr. Abrego Garcia will be returned to the United States. It's not unprecedented. I've been involved in cases of people that were wrongfully deported that have been brought back to the United States. And so this can be done. I think it will be done. What in your district, Congressman, as you know, we work on the coast side, but throughout San Mateo County, my students and I and other attorneys in the clinic are regularly going to the community after Catholic masses. We've done it 3 times in San Mateo, 1 time in Redwood City. We're going again to Redwood City on May 3rd since January 20th. And people are afraid. They're afraid of being deported without notice, because that seems to be what the Trump administration is doing. They're afraid of having their student visas revoked, and we can talk a little bit about those cases. They're worried about whether or not they have to register and expose themselves under the Alien Registration Act that the Trump administration is requiring people to do. They're concerned about their parole being revoked. People are walking in who entered under CBP-1 app procedures under the Biden administration. Hundreds of thousands have now received notice that they're supposed to leave within 7 days. Others who were granted parole from Colombia, Nicaragua, Venezuela, and Haiti were given notice a month ago to leave by this Thursday, April 24th. Folks don't have legal representation. And so the fact that the Trump administration was trying to cut back on legal representation for unaccompanied minors, and that's tied up in the courts as well. This is about not just about basic due process, but it's about basic humanity. And that's what folks are worried about. And that's what they're concerned with when we see them on these weekend immigration sessions that we're conducting.
Yeah, so there's the basic humanity piece, there's the substance of the facts of the case, and then there's sort of additional or sort of higher level, more global concern about a president defying a 9-0 Supreme Court ruling. Now, I wanted to the aforementioned Wilkinson decision, if I could quote from that and ask you sort of where this goes from here. A decision says, if today the executive claims the right to deport without due process and in disregard of court orders, what assurances will there be tomorrow that it will not deport American citizens and then disclaim responsibility to bring them home? And what assurance shall there be that the executive will not train its broad discretionary powers upon its political enemies? So, Bill, when you hear that passage, I am actually a little surprised to hear you say that you think this will be resolved in line with the court's ruling. Do you think it is a realistic possibility that the president would actually look to deport American citizens and look at his political enemies, or is that a bridge too far?
Well, I certainly hope that it's a bridge too far, but in that passage that you cited, he dropped a footnote there. Judge Wilkinson dropped a footnote there, alluding to a news article where Trump officials have talked about deporting U.S. citizens. And frankly, those of us who are immigration attorneys, we're probably one of the first they're going to attack, because there's been an attack not only on lawyers generally, but specifically people who are representing people in asylum proceedings. I cannot believe that would happen, but who knows, right? I don't think that's going to happen. I'm sure Professor Anand agrees with me that it's enlightening that 9 justices twice now have agreed that due process requires hearings, and so I've got to believe at the end of the day that the court is not going to allow this abuse and complete violation of the Constitution. So I think we're a long way from deporting U.S. citizens.
Easha, do you agree with that sentiment? And I'm curious if you also agree that you think at the end of the day, the president will essentially be compelled to comply with a 9-0 Supreme Court decision. Because I guess our backstop is U.S. Marshals, which are under the control of the president, as I understand it. We aren't there, but how do you think this will play out, if you could sort of prognosticate a little bit for us?
Yeah, so that's starting to look like a design flaw, isn't it, at this point, that the U.S. Marshals are under the control of the executive branch? Look, I think that the Trump administration is seeking a little bit of a confrontation here. Um, as Bill alluded to, the Supreme Court really bent over backwards to give the president an out when it came to the Abrego Garcia case. They said you have to facilitate, but not effectuate. I don't even know what that means, but it is certainly the case that if Trump had said, I've tried X, Y, and Z, and I just can't do it, I don't know that the Supreme Court would step back in. And instead, Trump kind of thumbed his nose at the Supreme Court. And I think what we've seen is it is not separation of powers and the Constitution that the president responds to. What the president responds to is political pressure. And so, Congressman Mullin is going to talk to you tonight about what the Democrats in Congress are doing. But you know what? I'd feel a lot more confident about constraints on the executive if there were more Democrats in Congress. I'd feel a lot more confident about Trump's unwillingness to do what he's threatening to do if there were people turning out in the streets and making clear to him that there'll be a political backlash. So, I'll end where I started, which is the Constitution doesn't have an enforcement mechanism, right? The Constitution doesn't have an army standing by. The norms of our country have held because we have a shared faith in American democracy and the ideals of separation of powers. And that shared faith has to do a lot of work here.
Gotcha. So we do have, I believe, some callers on the line. I do want to remind our viewers and listeners, press *3 to ask a question. Press *6 to subscribe to the newsletter. Let me turn it over to you, Chris. I think we actually have poll results. Let's post that. I'm curious what those results are, and then we'll go to some callers who have questions for our expert guests here. Chris.
Thank you, Congressman. We asked you, what is our biggest threat to democracy today? 67% of you said the president not respecting judicial power. 15% of you said misinformation. 8% said voting rights. And 5% polarization. I'd like to thank everyone who participated in that poll. And right now, why don't we go to our first caller? First up this evening is AJ, who's calling from San Mateo. AJ, you are on live with the Congressman. What's your question? AJ, are you there? AJ, are you there? Well, I can tell you that AJ wanted to know what kind of legal recourse is available to U.S. citizens when their electronics are searched at the border.
Can I jump in
Either
here?
one of you. Yeah.
So the U.S. government is at its strongest position at the border, and so they do have a right to inspect social media and look through your phones. This happens every day. It happened not just under this administration, but prior administrations as well. And so that is when they are at their strongest to invade our privacy. I do want to follow up on one point that Professor Anand raised, and that's the good faith that our Constitution is based on. There will be one other test before we get to whether or not there's going to be a violation of an order by the Supreme Court by President Trump. That test, I believe, is going to be contempt of court, and it's being set up by Judge Boasberg of the Federal District Court in D.C. In spite of the fact that it was his case that went to the Supreme Court initially, the JJG case involving the 200 Venezuelans that were deported, and the Supreme Court made very clear that he didn't have jurisdiction over that issue, that it's the jurisdiction is where individuals are being held. But Judge Boasberg wrote a 45-page opinion, I'm losing track of time, several days ago. And in that decision, he said, that may all be true, but my my temporary restraining order was in effect, and you should have followed it, and you should have been keeping me informed. You should have stopped those airplanes. And he is pretty sure that people lied to him and from the government. And he wants an explanation of who lied, because he's setting up the possibility that some government official is going to be held in contempt of court for violating his order. And that's going to be the first test, I think. When he holds somebody in contempt, will they show up and pay the price for being held in contempt?
Important point. We will certainly keep an eye on that. Chris, do we have another caller ready to go?
We do, Congressman. Next up, let's go to Clarence, who's calling from San Francisco. Clarence, what's on your mind?
Well, I phrased it earlier for you. I might not have it exactly, but you can help me. But the thing is, I'm really proud of the federal courts and the federal court judges who have posed some hindrance to the Trump administration. But I'm very disappointed with the Supreme Court, who seem to have given him immunity. Is there something that people can do or Congress can do to tell the Supreme Court, you need to reevaluate what you have done and try to rescind the privilege that they have given this Trump administration?
Either
So,
one of you want to take a swing at that? Yeah.
sure, I can say a couple of things. So I think that's right. I'm very proud of some of the things the Supreme Court has done in recent weeks. But let us not forget that many of the building blocks that led us to this moment were put in place by this Supreme Court. You named the immunity decision. There's also the decision to allow Donald Trump to run for reelection, notwithstanding that arguably he had engaged in insurrection. Um, there were also the substantive decisions, for instance, decisions limiting the independence of different parts of the federal government. For instance, decisions about the contours of affirmative action that gave the Trump administration ammunition to say that what they were doing in stripping funding from a whole host of diversity initiatives is merely constitutional compliance. Now, the people cannot get rid of presidential immunity since the Supreme Court purported to find it in the Constitution itself without a constitutional amendment. That said, remember that immunity decision applies only to the president himself, not to all of his subordinates. There are all sorts of ways that the president can still impose his will on subordinates by threatening to fire them, by promising to pardon them, and the like. But there are still a lot of people who are exposed by actions they're going to take during the Trump administration. And more to the point, I mean, the Constitution still has a remedy in it, right? It has an impeachment remedy in it. And so the other thing we all need to do is to take seriously the possibility that there's a world in which there's enough political power and enough political will to make that happen. And that requires a sort of sea change in our politics, the likes of which we haven't seen in recent generations, but also the times we're in, the likes of which we have not seen in recent generations either.
So, Isha, at the risk of asking a self-interested question,
Please.
in my opinion, Article 1 empowers Congress. You know, when you're talking about Department of Education and funding and the funding of departments across the federal government, when DOJ is enacting these unlawful cuts going around Congress, and our Speaker, Mike Johnson, with the Republican majority, essentially is giving these powers away to the executive. How do you see that resolving itself? I believe Democrats will take control of the House in 2 years and offer a check. It'll be a completely different approach to the executive. But in the meantime, as these cases work their way through the courts, how do you see the Article 1 question, congressional power of the purse versus these unlawful executive cuts and the different flashpoints that we'll see along the way here?
So I think that's exactly right. This is core Article 1 stuff, and a court worth its salt should be able to say so. There's been some great writing done on the sort of idea of empowerment, the idea that you can give the president funds and say, use it for X purpose, and they just say, no, we're declining to spend it. There's some pretty great historical evidence of the Supreme Court puts a premium on, suggesting that's never been the way things have been done in our democracy. Now, that said, the Supreme Court has put up one roadblock in the meanwhile, which is that it has channeled a number of these cases through what's called the Court of Federal Claims, which is a court that has a very narrow purview and is not one of the typical federal courts where these challenges get brought. And so the question, I think, for litigants is how to surmount that procedural challenge. I will also say that the Supreme Court is not doesn't operate in a silo. And its view of whether this is right, the Court of Federal Claims is sort of designed for when you have a government contract and they don't pay you quite as much as you thought you were going to get under the contract. You go to the Court of Federal Claims and haggle over that. If the Supreme Court is convinced that what we're seeing here is just a categorically different thing, it's not individual people haggling over dollars and cents. It's a core threat to our separation of powers. I think they think about these cases differently. Part of that is on the lawyers bringing these cases, but part of that is on Congress to continue to message that. And because we're in the minority, specifically Democratic members of Congress, to say, no, we're not giving away this power and authority. This is core Article 1 power. This is the heart of what Congress gets to do.
So, Chris, do we have another caller on the line for our guests?
Yes, and I'd just like to remind everyone, if you'd like to ask the congressman a question live, please press *3 on your telephone keypad right now. And before we go back to live callers, we do have a question online. This comes from Marianne. Marianne is wondering, maybe I'm naive, but if so many things Trump is doing are illegal, why is he allowed to keep on without any consequences? Is his immunity just a blanket green light to destroy our Constitution?
Well, that is probably the question of the we're in, just in terms of executive overreach, a seeming ability to operate in a broad way without congressional authorization. But that is what we are talking about with these court cases: is checks and balances, due process being violated, illegal actions being knocked back by the courts. One of the frustrations for me actually has been when these sort of extreme executive orders come down. There's coverage of them, but then there's very little follow-up about what actually happens as the court cases move through and what sort of the end results are. Not to in any way downplay the chaos that is unfolding on a daily basis, especially within these departments, and just sort of chaos seems to be the order of the day. But the question of sort of operating with impunity, the immunity powers essentially that he's been given by the courts. I'm of the opinion that the president is a criminal, never should have been allowed to be anywhere close to the Oval Office again. But I'm clearly biased on this. To our legal guests, just where this goes in terms of Trump himself and his ability to operate freely, even with his criminal background, and the sort of illegality that's on display, especially with the way Doge is operating. Where do we go from here? Does the Roberts Court ultimately assert its power as this continues to play out?
Yeah,
Well,
I
I-
just
Yeah,
Go ahead,
go
Bill.
with Bill. Let's go with Bill first, and then
thank
Easha.
you. Well, yeah, two things. One, I'm repeating what was said earlier, that at some point, I hope and I continue to still have faith in this court that that they will order him to do something, and if he doesn't comply, then we're at this. I know it's an overused phrase, but we're at this constitutional crisis point, which some people believe we're already there. But certainly, if he very much violates an order, that it's going to be whether or not Congress has the stomach to impeach, because that is the ultimate remedy. Short of that, and if we have to bear this for the full 4 years, then it's got to be political change, and we hope that the American voters come to their senses. And I know it's only half of the Americans voters. We only need a portion of them to come to their senses. That I'm actually hopeful in the immigration realm that this is going to backfire on the anti-immigrant folks. That what we are seeing today is so evil and inhumane that in some period of time, hopefully within my lifetime, that there's going to be progressive immigration reform, and it's fueled by what we're witnessing today, and that the majority of Americans are going to understand that we need progressive immigration reform. And you, Congressman Mullin, you're going to help to lead that change.
Well, Bill, on that point, I know you and I have had this discussion before about sort of the that exists for comprehensive immigration reform. We feel very far from that with an immediate crisis here. But in terms of discussion around mass deportations, I know that the Trump administration is hearing from the agricultural community, other business leaders that is totally unrealistic in terms of what that would do to our economy, as the economy is already teetering with the tariff madness. So I always thought, perhaps naively, that of any issue, crying out for a bipartisan coalition on this, given the business community and the ag community and the needs there for a workforce, that it would ultimately sort of force its way into the conversation, that there be comprehensive and humane immigration reform. We feel far from that, but I'm going to leave a hopeful note that this crisis that we're living through maybe spurs some additional action there. But frankly, it would have to be post-Trump, I believe. Easha, any additional thoughts on that? Just that exchange and sort of where we go from here as we queue up another call.
Sure. Two quick additions. I agree with everything that Bill said about impeachment. The two things I'll say about the immunity decision. The first is, remember, the court gives Trump, in my opinion, far too much immunity, but it certainly doesn't give him blanket immunity. He has immunity for acts taken in his official capacity when he is acting as president, not just as a political candidate, not just in his personal capacity, not just as his party leader. He does not have immunity for any of that stuff. And I think there is a case to be made that some of the things he's doing, the sort of score settling, the overreach that goes way beyond the office of the presidency, some of that stuff arguably doesn't fall squarely within the holding of the Supreme Court's Trump versus United States decision. Now, again, would I prefer that the Supreme Court had made clear that the president is not above the law? Of course, I would prefer that. But that's all to say, I wouldn't completely give up hope on that point. And then the other thing I just wanted to say on the subject of kind of what happens, I think that we've been talking about the ways you can push back by voting, by making sure there's more Democrats in Congress, by taking to the streets. Erica Chenoweth, who's a political scientist at Harvard, says that no regime continues if 3.5% of the population turns out, which is a huge number. But when you think about how many people are sickened and disheartened and fearful for the direction of our country, maybe not so huge. But not only those things, but I think kind of acting in solidarity with the people around you, with whatever privileges you have, can do some work to push back on the executive. So, if you are a professional at a tech company who has money to spend on legal counsel, spend it on one of the law firms that Trump has blacklisted for daring to defy him and represent the rule of law during the 2020 election. If you're a citizen, you have a neighbor who isn't, help them learn about their rights. There was an inspiring story out of Nashville of a father and son non-citizen who were trapped in their car by a nearby ICE van, and ICE didn't have the authority to pull them out of their car. And so the father and son stay in their car for hours as U.S. citizen neighbors bring them food, fill their gas tank, give them water. And so I think some of these inspiring stories of neighbors helping neighbors, people using whatever power they have to push back on the unlawful actions of this administration, are what we have in the interim between now and impeachment or now and prosecution.
Yeah. Okay, Chris, I think we have a few more calls here, and then we'll let our guests get on with their evening. But let's go ahead and if we have a call, or maybe we have an online call or an online question.
We have Michael on the line right now. Michael's calling from San Mateo. Michael, you're on live. What's your question?
My question is this. Since it's apparent that impeachment is the power of the Congress in a situation like this, what is the sentiment of your Republican colleagues, and how feasible is this movement? If you believe the press, it seems like there's a lot of solidarity behind Trump, but there has to be concern of anyone that has any fear of what Trump is doing. I'm curious to know what the sentiment is.
Yeah, so sentiment with my Republican colleagues. Well, to put it bluntly, and don't listen to me, listen to Republican Senator Murkowski from Alaska. There's fear among my Republican colleagues if they cross the president or they cross Elon Musk and his $500 billion war chest that he could spend a fraction of and take any of them out. There is real fear of political retribution. I think if you gave a majority of my Republican colleagues truth serum, they would tell you that what is happening is unlawful, unconstitutional, but they are trapped in this system where they have to comply. Now, they don't have to. They could stand up and exercise courage and stand up to the president, but essentially they would be putting their job on the line. Now, they have to have the courage to do that. And the overwhelming majority have been unwilling to do that. They control the gavels. They run the House. They run the Senate. We need our Republican colleagues to stand up to the president. And that simply hasn't happened. Now, I know in purple districts, we call them purple districts. These are the swing seats. There's real political pressure coming, not just from vocal progressives in those individual districts, but from their Republican constituents and voters about what they are seeing, this sort of lawlessness and chaos. And if you're getting close to retirement, what's happening to your 401k, and promises of dealing with cost of living issues, and nothing has, in an appreciable way, has happened with regard to cost of living challenges. So there's real anger out there. And now, politics, we will probably be channeling that anger in 2026. I think we will take the majority and offer a check. Trump won't be able to move anything through our House. The challenge is he's going around the Congress. So even if we do have the gavels, there will be a challenge presented there as well. But there is some real hardball politics at play, and fear at crossing a president who acts in a dictatorial way and in a thuggish manner. So this is, I can tell you, the president gets on the phone and demands that Republicans vote for his budget or else. So that is happening out there. I have no doubt that there's a real fear about crossing this president politically. Let's leave it at that. We have two more live calls for our guests. I'm being handed a note. So Chris, let's go back to the phone lines.
Thank you, Congressman. Next up, we have Kathleen, who's calling from Daly City. What's your question, Kathleen?
Hi. So I was advised by a friend that even Americans should carry passports along with their real IDs, and was wondering if that would be helpful, and also wanted to say resist. And also, I'm really fearful for free and fair elections, even in the midterms, that we would be able to take over. I'm really concerned about that. Anyway, the passport thing.
I didn't quite
Bill,
hear the
Bill,
first
can
part
you
of the question.
tackle the passport one? Yeah.
What was the first?
ahead.
What was that question? I'm sorry.
So
what was the
I-
question?
Yeah. Thank you for that. The audio was a little muddy there. I was having trouble hearing that myself. But the essence of it, as I understand it, was: do Americans need to carry their passports if they're traveling around the world? Just okay. It's a very general question about passports. I for one was renewing my passport this week because we've got the Real ID process unfolding, and I need to be able to fly. But I guess I've been hearing some concerns about if you travel to another country and you come back through the country, if there's going to be some questions raised, issues raised as you try to re-enter the country. There's a lot of sort of rumors around how this process works. I don't know if you can illuminate us on any of this.
Generally speaking, I would make a distinction between U.S. citizens who were born in the United States and naturalized U.S. citizens, and I also would make a distinction between where they are traveling, because there's a list of 40 some odd countries that are on the hit list, if you will, that folks should not be traveling to without good reason or some emergent reason. And so they range from Muslim countries to places like Colombia. And so I would be a little bit cautious traveling, period. But the direct answer to the question is that, and the reason I'm concerned about naturalized citizens is because if there's something in your history that can be found out from social media, or something that you were engaged in allegedly prior to your naturalization, there is this concept called denaturalization. your citizenship can be taken away from you if you are not eligible to be naturalized in the first place. And so there can be some concerns depending on what a review of your background would reveal. So I'd be cautious.
Okay, thank you for that, Bill. We do have an additional caller, I believe. Chris?
We do. We have Nancy calling from South San Francisco. Nancy, you're on live. What's your question?
My question is, does Trump legally have the power to put in place these tariffs that he's putting in place that are screwing up our economy?
You know what? I'm
I
sorry,
can,
I couldn't quite catch that last part of that, Nancy. Do you mind repeating that question, Nancy?
Let me repeat it for her. Nancy was wondering, does Trump legally have the power to put in place the tariffs that he is screwing up the economy with?
I can
That's
take
a
this
great
one.
question, Nancy. Yeah, go ahead, Easha.
So one thing we're seeing in this arena is litigation with some strange bedfellows. So the lead lawsuit challenging the tariffs, and I think it's got a good likelihood of success, is brought by the New Civil Liberties Alliance, which is a very conservative right-wing group. And their theory is that, the Constitution gives Congress the power to control tariffs. The president's argument is that Congress has given that power over to him. And for a long time, it has been a right wing talking point that Congress cannot give too much power or too much discretion to the agency. The right wing has used that legal theory to curtail, for instance, the power of the Food and Drug Administration to regulate tobacco, the power of the Biden administration to forgive loans or impose vaccine mandates. And so this tool and this theory that the conservative legal movement has employed for many years, that has had a lot of success at the Supreme Court, is now being used to challenge Donald Trump's tariffs. And so when I say I'm optimistic about this lawsuit, I'm optimistic assuming that the conservative judges and the conservative Supreme Court treat the goose like the gander, right? That they stay consistent. But I think there's a very strong argument. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution says Congress has the sole authority to control tariffs. And I think there's a very strong argument that Congress certainly didn't just hand that power over in the statute that Trump is invoking, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, and maybe even couldn't hand that power over to the president, given our constitutional structure.
I can assure you, we want that power, Easha, especially with what we're witnessing here. I think we have one final question for our guests, and then we'll let you get on with your evening. So, Chris, we have one final caller for our guests, I believe.
Thank you, Congressman. Yes, we have Stephanie on the line. Stephanie's calling from San Carlos. Stephanie, what's your question?
How could you all convince me that we're not already in an authoritarian regime and that we'll have another election that will count? I'm asking because all the evidence, what I see is some controlling the military, the press, Congress through fear, obtaining private personal information and social security and stuff, saying he's a king and a dictator. I think the fact that we're in a democracy might be a facade, and that's I'd like to know how. I'd like to be convinced that we are still a democracy, that we will have an election, etc.
Whoever wants that one. That's a meaty one.
Congressman, I'm going to defer to you. I just, I know I'm a little bit older than you, but you're a lot wiser than me, and I want to still have hope that there are reasonable, sensible people out there that will do the right thing in the next election.
Absolutely. And, it is a reminder, and this has sort of been oft-cited here during this period, that our system really relies on people doing the right thing. We rely on presidents respecting the rule of law. We rely on individuals who make up the checks and balances and the different branches, and ultimately we rely on people to do the right thing. We are certainly witnessing authoritarian style attacks. There's no doubt in my mind that Donald Trump admires Vladimir Putin, wants to be a strong man. Probably isn't just kidding when he says he'd like to look at a third term. But this is where the people come into play, not only opposition leaders in Congress who unfortunately at the moment don't have the gavels, but may in a couple of years. There is some thought out there that Trump will somehow cancel the election in 2026. I don't see that happening. That would be under, some kind of a martial law provision. I find that very hard to believe. We will have an election in 2026, and I think there will be a rebalancing of power in our system. But Easha, any additional thoughts there before we let you go?
Only to say that I think the last part of your question is the most concerning part to me, which is Donald Trump's rhetoric around himself, right? Historically, the term king has been something leveled against presidents as an insult. Right? Opponents of President Jackson called him King Andrew. Critics of Richard Nixon said he was running an imperial presidency. We're sort of in a new era where it's Trump's supporters, Trump himself, Elon Musk, Kash Patel, who are describing Donald Trump as king. And I think that does presage pressure on our separation of powers, the likes of which we have not yet seen in our history. But I'm with Congressman Mullin. I think there will be an election. I think there'll be a rebalancing of power. But it's up to all of us between now and then to keep speaking up, keeping the political pressure on, doing what we can for ourselves and our friends and our neighbors to act as that check until we can take back one of the branches of government.
Easha Anand and Bill Hing, you've been phenomenal. I'm grateful for your generosity of time addressing the questions from my constituents. I want to thank you both for being with me. Before I let you go, because when I do, I think some folks will drop off who are listening. Make sure to press *3. My constituents press *3 to ask a question. I will still be here, but we're going to let Easha Anand and Bill Hing get on with your evening. Thank you both so much. I'm grateful for your expertise and wonderful to see you both.
Thank you so much for having me.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay. With that, a reminder, press *3. I will be here. I think we're going to try to keep this to around 90 minutes or so, but I have time to answer either questions as a follow-up to what you just heard, or if you have other questions, other issues on your mind, feel free to offer that. I know that a lot of people have been reaching out. They are deeply concerned that our democracy is fragile and slipping away, and that the resources so many in our community rely upon are being stripped. There is a lot being done to protect our institutions, and we need to pursue all possible means. As a newly appointed member of the House Energy and Commerce Committee, one of the most concerning things that I have are proposals to cut over $800 billion from the budget. And the way that resolution is crafted, there's really no way to do that without decimating Medicaid. We know it as Medi-Cal in California, an essential health insurance program for millions across America. The Medi-Cal program serves so many. I believe the number is over 140,000 just in my district are Medi-Cal recipients. I am going to be fighting in that committee context against those cuts. And what we really need is for Republicans, as I indicated, the majority party to step up. And there is real political pressure on those Republicans, many of whom represent significant Medi-Cal populations or Medicaid populations if you are from another state. The reality is that the Republicans control the House, the Senate, and the presidency. But just because Trump won, it doesn't mean Republicans need to do everything he tells them to do. And we addressed that in the previous segment. Many of these issues are causing direct harm to their own constituents. For example, I think we have a map, Chris, if we can pull that up, if the broadcast team can show that. This shows the rate of people across America under 65 years old who rely on Medicaid, those dark areas on the map. One of the highest is here in California's 22nd district, where 54% of Republican David Valadio's constituents under 65 years old, including children, depend on Medi-Cal for health insurance. In our House Republican Speaker Mike Johnson's district, 40% of his district's constituents there in Louisiana rely on the Medicaid program. In Pennsylvania, 31% of Republican Rob Bresnahan's constituents are on Medicaid. In Wisconsin, 21% of Republican Van Orden's constituents are receiving Medicaid benefits. These proposed cuts are coming to the Energy and Commerce Committee, and I will again be voting no. We can't let Trump give tax cuts to billionaires at the expense of health care for millions of Americans. I have also been joining dozens of legislative efforts to try and combat the harm being caused, including proposing bills, sending demand letters, joining amicus briefs for many of the court cases that were cited earlier this evening, speaking out on the House floor, and yes, working across the aisle, urging my Republican colleagues to do the right thing on these issues. Just to give you a flavor of what we in the opposition party are doing to try to beat back some of these actual proposals moving through the House. So with that, I'd like to go to callers. I want to remind those on the phones, again, if you'd like to ask a question, press *3 to get connected with our staff. That's *3. If you are watching online at kevinmullin.house.gov/live, you can submit your questions in writing. So with that, let's see if we have any callers or comments.
Next up is Nicole. Nicole is calling from Menlo Park. Nicole, what's your question?
Hi, thank you, Congressman, for your time tonight. My question is, what are the Democrats doing to become more broadly appealing to the broader swath of American people? I, too, would love to see more Democrats in the House and in the Senate, but I do think one of the reasons that the Democrats sustained so many losses in the recent election is because I think the party isn't as appealing to a wide variety of Americans as appealing as it used to be. And I'm wondering what the Democratic Party is doing about that.
Yeah, no, thank you. It is a great question and something that's occupying lots of time in Democratic circles and some debates internally about how to rebrand the party. We need to be able to appeal as a party. And I should say, I do need to be a little bit careful here. This is an official event funded by the taxpayers. I can't talk too much about campaign mechanics or too much about how the party operates. In fact, we are actually exploring some ways to do that sort of outside official means. More to come on that at some point. But essentially, looking internally, the Democratic Party, and sort of just speaking factually here, we need to appeal to voters who are infrequent voters, who will come out in a presidential cycle, maybe drawn out by somebody like a Trump figure. We certainly do well in special elections and lower turnout elections where higher educated, higher propensity voters participate. But we need to have broad appeal. And there's really a discussion happening about that where we need to make sure that people feel at home within our party, that we're not exclusionary, that we are inclusive in the way we operate and with the language we use. And we need to be mindful of all of that. So there is an internal conversation happening about that. I just will say in the sort of the immediate, and I had a House Democratic Caucus meeting today, 150 events just in the last couple of weeks being held by my Democratic colleagues across the country, in particular calling out the Medicaid day of action we had all over America, talking about the impact of potential Medicaid cuts and cost of living events, focusing on the real challenges around cost of living that have not been addressed in any meaningful way by the Trump administration. And we here on the San Francisco Peninsula are the epicenter of the affordability challenge when it comes to housing and child care. So we know all too well those challenges affecting the middle class. So there's an aggressive posture by Democrats in Congress with an understanding that there are challenges when you don't have the gavels. But one of my colleagues, Jamie Raskin, who I admire greatly, from Maryland, talks about, it's not enough to be a member of Congress, as hard as it can be, the job can be, representing 762,000 people, flying back and forth, voting, carrying legislation, doing everything you do, holding digital town halls and in-person town halls. All those things are great and are necessary, but we also need to be organizers. We need to be working with the public who are frustrated, outraged at what they see, and bring about a mobilizing through the different affiliated organizations, different groups. We're certainly doing all of the amicus briefs and working the judicial process, but we need to be doing the work of mobilizing the public in opposition, winning in the court of public opinion, and ultimately, yes, there will be an election in 26, and there will be a presidential election in 28. And that energy that we're seeing at our town halls, that has to be channeled appropriately. But November 26th is a long way away, and we need to make sure we're doing everything in our power to push back in the interim until we can bring some balance to the equation. So I appreciate it, and it is an ongoing conversation, believe me, about what we as a party must do. Not only to be an effective opposition party, but to be a majority party again in America. So thank you for that. Other comments or questions from our public, Chris?
Congressman, we have an online question next. This comes from Jesse, and Jesse says, Representative Mullin, will you state your position on impeaching Donald Trump?
I absolutely support impeaching Donald Trump. If I was in the Congress when those initial articles went through, I most certainly would have voted for them. I think what he is doing outside the Congress, ignoring the rule of law, not affording individuals due process, ignoring the courts, essentially ignoring the traditions in this country, again, with the caveat that the President of the United States, as an individual, we need him to do the right thing in our system, and he clearly is not. So there is ample evidence there that he has committed impeachable offenses. The real challenge is a practical one, and those articles of impeachment would not move in this Congress. Republican Speaker Mike Johnson would not entertain that. Those would get buried, just like our tariff powers and other Article 1 powers would get buried. That is why we need to rebalance the equation, take the House, and I think you will see that process move forward if the Democrats are in control. So I am one of the 200 plus members of our caucus. There may be some varying opinions there, but there's no doubt in my mind that he has committed impeachable offenses and continues to with the illegal actions in the executive, his executive assertions of power. So thank you for the question. Chris, other questions?
Yes, sir. We have another live caller. Anne Marie is calling from San Francisco. Anne Marie, what's on your mind?
Congressman, I wanted to reinforce what you said earlier about organizing the Democrats and to include in that organizing collaboration with Republicans and non-Democrats. My mother lives completely on Medi-Cal. My brother, my mom is 93. My brother is mentally ill. He relies exclusively on Medi-Cal. They cannot have that taken away from them because it's the only thing that's keeping them alive in these facilities they were able to get as a result of Medi-Cal. So I'm begging that you and the other Democrats that are so frustrated figure out ways to bring that kind of a story in terms of bringing collaboration to the non-Democrats in the Congress.
Absolutely, and thank you for that. telling those stories is absolutely crucial. We'll be presenting those kinds of accounts, stories about the importance of Medicaid in people's lives. And there's also, I think, just a general lack of understanding of the breadth of Medicaid and how community clinics rely on Medicaid. We heard an incredibly compelling account in our in-person town hall recently from an individual whose adult son has autism, and they rely on Medi-Cal services for their adult child. We are going to be presenting those human stories and make it extremely difficult on my Republican colleagues to follow the Trump administration and follow the Republican leadership. We want to make that painful. I am hearing that just because of the politics and the resonance of this issue, there's some backtracking on the Republican side about this, but there's really no way, even if the number's 200 billion and not 880 billion the way it is right now, there's no way you can make those cuts without impacting, in California's case, Medi-Cal and Medicaid across the country. I think there's going to be some issues brought up around maybe ways to deal with ratios and some other ways to sort of save money in Medicaid. But even if that number, like I said, is dramatically reduced, there will be major impacts in this country. So we're going to fight that proposal. We're going to call that out. And I think that issue is resonant across the country. We're going to be focusing on it. We'll do whatever we can to stop those cuts and make that a central issue in the upcoming session here. We return to Washington on Monday, and we're going to get into these conversations in full. And my committee, the Energy and Commerce Committee, is going to be a real focal point for that conversation. So I welcome that. I look forward to being very vocal in that committee. So other questions, Chris, from my constituents.
Our next caller is Elena. Elena's calling from Redwood City. Elena, you're on live with the Congressman.
Hi, Congressman. Thank you so much for holding the town hall and opportunity to ask questions. My question is about the recent executive order on Department of Education, and how will that impact California schools and the funding here? And the second part is, does California and other states, are they able to renegotiate amount of state taxes that pay to federal government? Because obviously the amount of federal services is being drastically cut to the state.
So thank you so much, Elena. I caught certainly the first part of the question, just around Department of Education in general. These illegal proposals, really, they're illegal, they're unconstitutional, they're immoral. You're talking about the IDEA program and IEP programs that individuals have with school districts, the special education funding that disabled kids rely on, that school districts rely on. And I have to say, the federal government needs to fund special education in a more robust way. There's been a lot of burdens on the states when it comes to sort of backfilling what the federal government is not fully funding. So maybe that may be a topic for another day. But just in terms of what is being proposed with decimating the Department of Education, not just decimating, eliminating the Department of Education. This has been a longstanding conservative position, honestly, that predates Trump, predates Elon Musk. There has been a real push to try to undermine, at some points, proposals to eliminate the Department of Education. That has been beaten back by the Congresses to date. And I think it will be again, because of the power of the purse, Article 1. Any of those changes must go through Congress. And the executive simply does not have the power to do that. That may be aspirational on their part, but there are lawsuits right now, suits against Linda McMahon, the Secretary of Education. I'll be signing on to an amicus brief in regard to a case pushing back against the illegal cuts to the Department of Education. So I think there's a reason those previous efforts have not been successful. Just if you look at the mechanics of what the Department of Education does, And as we know, K-12, K-14 public education, largely the domain of the states. The federal government does supply a critical piece, though, of funding and does administration around student loans and so forth. It plays a critical role. And it also plays roles that people may not necessarily be aware of. So we are going to fight that in the courts. We'll fight that in the Congress. And I am hopeful that we'll be successful in beating back yet another attempt by conservative forces to undermine the Department of Education. But thank you for the call, Elena. Other callers, Chris.
Next up, we have Sandy. Sandy's calling from San Carlos. Sandy, you're on live.
Would you mind reading my question for me?
Absolutely. Sandy's calling to ask a question about campaign finance. And she wants to know, is anyone looking into the billionaires having something to do with the outcome of elections?
Well, yep. A little bit of feedback there. But Sandy, wonderful question. And you are right to be thinking about billionaires and their impacts on our democracy. There is no question that when you have billionaires pushing money through super PACs, there's a real distortion of our democracy. It affects the way campaigns get run. Essentially, the Supreme Court opened the floodgates with its decision in Citizens United, essentially equating corporate spending with free speech, if you can believe that, and it's quite a stretch in terms of its legal argument. There are very few limits and restraints on the campaign finance system. We must undo Citizens United decision. I support constitutional amendments to do that. I support public financing of our campaigns, something that is certainly good in terms of its sort of the idea and the intent behind it, but it has trouble getting traction because the public feels in many respects they don't want to fund campaigns using taxpayer money, funding campaigns, that it really is up to politicians to look to individuals and other entities to raise funds for their campaigns. And you know, campaigns are expensive. They're expensive to run. I am a middle-class individual. I have to participate in this campaign finance system, and it is the least, my least favorite part of this job. This is one of my favorite things to do, is to talk to my constituents. Raising money and participating in that political process is not fun. But it is the system that we have until we have broad, extensive reforms that can put some limits on what gets spent. And billionaires through super PACs, millionaires and billionaires funding super PACs that actually run outside the campaigns themselves, influencing our elections, are deeply problematic, and it is a sort of a cancer on our political system. So I certainly share sort of the sentiment behind that question, Sandy, and I will do whatever I can. I'm the co-chair of something called the Task Force on Strengthening Democracy. When the Democrats take control in a couple of years, the first bill we're going to introduce, the first one, is going to be a comprehensive set of democracy reforms that mirror what has been done in California in terms of voting access, looking at gerrymandering and trying to curb the excesses in the states with how districts get drawn. We in California have done quite a bit on access to the ballot. In fact, San Mateo County has been a real leader on voting by mail and lowering the barriers to voting. There are attacks, even as we speak, on voting rights. Republican colleagues trying to erect barriers to registration and access to the ballot. That's going to be an ongoing battle, but you sort of overlay the campaign finance challenge on top of it. There's so much work to be done in this country to bring about fairness and equity in just the campaign process and how our democracy operates. So Appreciate that, Sandy. Much more to come on that. I think we have two more questions. I'm being handed a note. One, I think, is on healthcare. Let's go if we can to the healthcare question, Chris.
Great. First up, it's an online question from Vicky. And Vicky asks, what can be done to restore funding to public health agencies in order to protect Americans and others around the world?
There have been dramatic cuts to the public health infrastructure, and there could not be, these cuts could not be more unwise. As you look at bird flu, look, we're still learning what happened with COVID, what worked, what didn't work in terms of public health infrastructure. And I think we're in that process of praying that the bird flu does not turn into an epidemic, and then we have to deal with that kind of a scenario again. But if we do, we need to have a public health infrastructure that moves quickly, where there's intergovernmental cooperation from the federal, the state, and the local level. You've got a situation where Donald Trump and Elon Musk are slashing funding to the National Institutes of Health. Their NIH cuts to something like Alzheimer's research. There have been tremendous gains and discoveries when it comes to Alzheimer's, something that affects wide swaths of our public. And they are cutting funding, which will set those efforts back. Why would you cut funding when you're having incredible progress on something as devastating as Alzheimer's? So, Elon Musk has talked about $2 trillion in cuts. There is no way they're going to get to anything close to that with the kinds of cuts that they are making. But the impact of the cuts they're making is devastating. And the NIH cuts are a prime example of that. So the committee I sit on, Energy and Commerce, it doesn't have the word health in it, but essentially much of American health policy goes through that committee. My wonderful colleague, now retired, Anna Eshoo, was the ranking member of the Health Subcommittee of the Energy and Commerce Committee. She's done incredible work over her 30 years in Congress. We need to keep the momentum on a number of issues: childhood cancer, the NIH funding. We here are in an innovation economy corridor. I have more life sciences companies in my district than any other district in America. There is incredible science happening a stone's throw from where I'm sitting tonight. That is happening right here on the peninsula. So many of these companies got their start with NIH grants doing science and research and development at the infancy stages of a number of challenges. And to cut that off is penny wise and pound foolish, to say the least, if we want to maintain our position as a center for healthcare discovery and science and innovation. So it makes absolutely no sense to me. But thank you very much for the question. I think we have time just for one more question, and we'll be at the 90-minute mark. But Chris, let's go ahead and take our final question of the evening, if we can.
Great. And our final caller is Carol. Carol's calling from Redwood City. Carol, what's your question?
My question is, all of these esoteric concepts that you have been talking about, Congressman, all of it is going to be thrown by the wayside if you stop and think, what is the fundamental basic thing that happened? What happened was our fellow Americans, who probably don't listen to anything you're having to say, that don't understand the separation of power. And we all know that the wheels of justice move really slow. So how did a corrupt, ignorant man like Trump get elected the first time and then get elected the second time? His power is in the MAGA base. And the MAGA base gets fed red meat every day and amplified their lies on Fox News, Newsmax, all of these sources. And that's what they hear. You see Kristi Noem on TV constantly with her lies about the immigrants. American people are visual. They watch TV. They have about a 30-second attention span. So everything you're talking about, I agree. I agree with it all. But those are educated people that understand the three branches of government. And the MAGA base do not. And I believe we're not going to change things. He's going to go on doing lawless, whatever it is, until we get control of the MAGA base. And there's a lot of them there that do have intelligence, that are susceptible to listen to the rule of law, three branches of government, our Constitution, but we're not doing it.
Look, I could not agree more. It's something that keeps me up at night as a former communications and mass media studies student at the University of San Francisco. I have followed this intently over my time in business and in politics, and I'm a media consumer. I am deeply frustrated. The attacks by the president on the traditional institutional media is straight out of a fascist playbook to try to undermine the checks from the free press, who act as a check on the extremes and the actions of politicians, myself included, who deal with the press, who should and do ask tough questions. But there's a right-wing media infrastructure ecosystem, starting with Fox News and Roger Ailes way back in the Newt Gingrich era, where unfortunately misinformation continues to spread. It's amplified by a right-wing social media infrastructure where misinformation gets amplified, and that cuts through. It reaches people. We, on the progressive side of the ledger, must build our own progressive media infrastructure. And we also, I think, need to be supporting the traditional, independent, free media, free of political influence, if you will, and progressive thought. These are the institutions that our democracy is dependent on. I am encouraged that there have been at least conversations around supporting media. It is not without controversy in terms of tax dollars supporting media. But look, there are attacks on NPR and public broadcasting being brought by my conservative colleagues. This will be an ongoing battle, and the challenge is in a digital age. How with so much information and so many sources of information out there, how do you cut through the noise with facts and truth? And how do you essentially make sure that people aren't inventing their own facts and inventing their own truth? But this is absolutely part of the playbook by this administration. We have a role to play in fighting back and looking at any means to build up a progressive media infrastructure while also supporting independent traditional media. But unless we do that, too many folks, I think, are being influenced by what is bad information. And you raise a central challenge for all of us who care about our democracy. And I will continue in that task force on strengthening democracy to look at those issues. So I'm grateful for that. The question I often get, and I'll wrap up with this, is what can the public do? We need a mass public movement to fight back. Here are just a few ideas. I think we have a slide with this. If we have that, let's go ahead and put that up. Just a few suggestions as we wrap up here. If you have friends or family in Republican-controlled districts, talk with them. Ask them to call their representatives. While it's effective to be an outsider from a district, it's much more effective if there's somebody inside the member of Congress's district to hear from them. We are responsive to the pressure we get from our constituents. They need to hear it from the public, the people they were elected to represent. That constituents are unhappy with what's being done. Stay engaged. I know it's hard, but we can't lose momentum. A lot of damage is being done now, but we must stay vigilant. Do what we can to keep the pressure on. Join a local organization that aligns with your values. Speak out on social media. Share your stories. The stories are so impactful, more than talking points that I can give as a politician. Actually sharing your personal stories about how you're being impacted and what you want for the future of your country. So in closing, I want to thank our incredible guests. I want to thank all of you for calling in and participating. I want to thank my incredible staff here in my San Mateo district office, especially Samantha, who coordinated all of this. Most importantly, thank you all for joining us tonight, for being engaged in our democracy. None of us can protect it alone, and I am sincerely grateful to all of you. Finally, we are planning an in-person town hall in the very near future. So if you'd like to stay in touch, please sign up for my e-newsletter at kevinmullin.house.gov. Thank you so much for the honor of representing you. Thank you for watching and listening this evening, and we'll see you very soon.
Thank you, Congressman. And if you have not spoken to a member of our team yet about subscribing to the e-newsletter, please stay on the line right now. At the sound of the tone, spell out your name and your email address slowly. Thank you all for joining, and have a great night.